All right. Hello, everybody out there. Thanks for joining us today at Virtual Mysterious Galaxy. Very excited today to have David Weber and Jacob Holo discussing the Valkyrie Protocol, the second book in their series. And my name is Matthew Berger. I'm one of the co-owners of Mysterious Galaxy, and I'm just Savannah White of the show. So I'm going to hand it over to David and Jacob. But before I do, make sure that you use the Ask a Question button down below to make sure that you ask whatever you want of the authors. And if you want to get the book signed and personalized, go ahead and use that buy button below. And it will take you to our website where you can do that and just put in the comments that you'd like it personalized and to who and how. And we'll be getting those out to you as quickly as we can. So I'm going to hand it over, and we'll see you guys in a little bit, okay?
Thank you.
Thank you.
So, okay, I guess as we usually do at panels, the first thing to do is to introduce ourselves, although I'm figuring most of the folks who tuned in probably can tell that I'm David and he's Jacob.
And they would be right.
Yes, they would. Jacob and I have known each other for how long now, Jacob?
I think it's about 6 years.
Yeah, it sounds about right.
5-6 years.
Yeah. And we met at a signing, actually.
Got a free copy of On Basilisk Station signed from you. And I brought my dog-eared copy of In Death Ground.
Oh.
And put that in front of you, and you went, whoa.
Yeah, I was like, I have seen ancient papyri from Egypt.
But that was actually the first place where I encountered your writing was In Death Ground. Mm-hmm. And that book actually inspired some of my earlier work. Mm-hmm. And kind of led into me wanting to, do this as a job. And
well, I have to say that Jacob and his wife Heather became really good friends of me and Sharon, or of my and Sharon's, I guess. I'm not sure what the correct construction there is. And I knew that he was that he had done several indie self-published novels, and I asked him for copies of a couple of them, and he gave them to me. And I was like, "Whoa, okay, this is somebody who could do this in the traditional publishing route, publisher's house route too." So 3 years ago, I think it was your birthday, and we were eating at
It was Heather's. It was my wife's birthday.
I remember there was a birthday involved.
Yeah. We were at Chili's, I believe.
I thought it was going to be Tuesdays, but I was wrong about. You can be wrong about the restaurant. I'll be wrong about.
Okay.
Okay, that'll work. It's a collaboration. Anyway, I had an idea for a novel, actually an entire series of novels that I had been wanting to do for right on 30 years. I actually pitched the concept to Jim Bain at the same time that I pitched Honor Harrington. And I am at a point in my life and in my career where I have, I like to call it my perishable skill set, because it's things that I've learned by doing this professionally for 30 years that aren't going to do anybody any good when I'm gone. So I liked what Jacob had done a lot. I liked him personally. His background complements mine incredibly well for a writing partnership in science fiction.
The historian and the engineer.
Yeah, exactly. And so I asked him if he would be interested in doing a collaboration with him, and I explained what it was. And little did I know when I was explaining it to him that.
So the Gordian Division series, we deal with time travel. We have a multiverse setting, and I once swore to myself that I would never, ever, under any circumstances, write a time travel novel. So,
never make
New York
rash
Times
promises.
best-selling author David Weber proposes that we write a time travel novel together. And I had sworn I would never do this. So, of course, my answer was, yes, David, I think that's a wonderful idea.
Well, I have to say that the Gordian Division, Gordian Protocol series is both like and not like quite a few things that are out there. I always loved H. Beam Piper's Paratime novels. And I thought it was a marvelous concept. And I made a note, I'm going to steal that someday, even before I had sold my first novel. And so when the time came, I did. Conceptually, in some regards, I did. But what I was really looking for was kind of an open-ended series that would be linear, but not necessarily have a central story arc that was going to carry through from book 1 to book 2, but that would let me play with history and with alternate universes and with time travel. Now, the interesting thing is that Jacob had sworn he would never write a time travel novel, and I had seen time travel primarily as a way to create the multiverses for us to go back and forth between. And yet, when we got into actually doing the novels, the time travel aspect of it became a much more central component of the series than I had intended before I proposed the novel to I'll never write a time travel novel co-author. I think it was a natural consequence of working out the story concepts that I probably had been in error in my original thought that it could have a lower quotient of time travel than it has. And I have to say that Jacob is the guy who has worked out the nuts and bolts framework for how our iteration of time travel works.
Well, a lot of that, like early back and forth with the Gordian Protocol, and then refining some of the aspects of the rule set with the Valkyrie Protocol. Well, a lot of it was, Jacob, this is what I need the rules to allow. We need the rules to allow us to do this sort of story. It's like, okay, now I need to design the rules to allow that to happen.
That's right. That's right.
So kind of took the initial story concept that David, you had and kind of reverse engineered a set of time travel rules that could then service that story and then the larger series that you had in mind.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's actually interesting because we have a question here that says, how do you guys manage the intricacies of a plot that includes time travel as a writer? And what time travel stories by other artists do you enjoy the most? Well, I already put Piper on the list there for time travel stories that I enjoy. I think the ones that I enjoy the most are the ones in which the time traveler has a quantifiable impact on the continuum in which he does the time traveling. And by that, what I mean is I've never been a big fan of the stories where you can make all kinds of changes, but then at the end of the story, it turns out that something comes along and erases the paradox that you've created. Jacob, you're not aside from our own illustrious work, you're not a real big fan of time travel, are you?
Well, there's. I mean, I enjoy, I enjoy some time travel. I mean, I kind of, I remember way back when I was, I went to see the second Back to the Future movie. And I remember driving home and, telling my parents about this plot hole. And it's like, these certain, the way that they portrayed the time travel rules, well, they broke their own rules in that movie. And my dad was, no, you just don't understand the rules. It's like, I'm pretty sure I do. So one of the things that, with a lot of time travel stories that kind of bugs me, besides the obvious, plot holes that you can get into, is the sequence of events. And by events, I mean the time travel disruptions. So normally when you're reading like a book or you're watching a movie, the time travel disruptions happen in terms of, which page. They happen in page order or, in the sequence of watching the movie. But there's no rule that says that one intervention trumps another intervention normally when you're watching or reading these works. And that's one thing that I very much wanted to have in our rule set. And so there's the concept of the true present in the Gordian Division series. And the true present is, this is the end point of time. And it's marching forward at 1 second per second. And there's no future past that yet. And it's in the 30th century. And that, if you go back in time, you spend a month in the past, and then you go back to the true present, well, it's a month later. So what does this give us? Well, this gives us a clock that allows us to sequence all the time travel events that happen prior to, the main future setting. It allows us to enforce sequence on the events that, well, I went back, and then I went back to the Byzantine Empire, as we do in the Valkyrie Protocol, and then then we follow up in the 30th century, and all these things have a very strict sequence that can be explained via the rule set. So that's
okay. We had a review of Gordian Protocol that said, I really like the book, but there's the obvious problem of why so-and-so didn't just go back and kill so-and-so and prevent this whole thing from happening. And we had explained in considerable detail why, no, you can't do that. But it does make life more difficult for the characters. It makes life more difficult for us as the writers in some respects, but it also keeps us sane. And it allows us to go ahead and produce a story in which consequences matter at the moment that they happen. Now, it occurred to me that we haven't really talked too much about the content of the book itself. And that kind of lends itself to the question about the intricacies of working together. In the first book, we have, in the Gordian Protocol, the first book, we have a time traveler who experiences turbulence on his way back to the future, to his home, his present, our future. And he arrives there to find that his future isn't there anymore, that there's another future there. And he has to figure out what happened. And there is one guy who knows what happened, although he thinks he's having a psychotic event. He knows where the divergence point between the two universes that our hero, Raybert, is experiencing. And he's one of our our other hero, Benjamin Schroeder. Schroeder's a historian, and he happens to...
A historian from our time.
From our time, yes. Raybert is a historian from the 30th century. Benjamin is one of this teeny handful of people who, despite the shift in the timelines, he came into existence from the fertilization of the same two gametes in both timelines. And as such, there's a connection between the two of them. But he won't tell Raybert what Raybert wants to know. And the reason that he won't tell him is that the difference is that Adolf Hitler died in like the first year of the Second World War. And the history of Germany was radically different after that, and the Holocaust never happened. So to save these 15 universes that are tied up in the Gordian knot of time, which is where the book comes from, he has to face the moral dilemma of, do I ensure that Adolf Hitler lives and everything that follows from that, all the tragedy happens? Or do I not tell this guy what he needs to know? And 15 universes self-destruct in a few thousand years.
And also, Benjamin has a fiancée who he's pretty sure will not exist.
Well, she's Jewish, and all four of her grandparents are in Poland during the Second World War. So he's pretty sure. And he tells her, he says, I can't tell him, because if I tell him, you won't exist. And she kind of goes, whoa. And then she looks at him and says, well, you got to tell him. And he says, what are you talking about? And she says, do you think I want to exist? If 15 universes, 15 Earths, 15 solar systems, Milky Ways, and 15 entire flipping universes are going to cease to exist because I was born. And that was kind of the depth of the moral quandary that I wanted to create in this book. That was one of the key points that I wanted to go to from the very beginning. Jacob helped realize that moment in a lot of ways. Now, in the process, however, Sysgov, which is the society that Jacob comes from, figured out...
comes from.
Yes, Raybert. I'm sorry. What did I say? I said Jacob.
Said
Jacob invented it, so he comes from there,
Yeah.
or it comes from him. I don't know. Anyway, they had believed that they could meddle in the past all they wanted to and never change it because they had empirical evidence that they could. Every time they went back to some place where they'd meddled, nothing had happened. Okay. What they didn't realize is that nothing had happened in their past. But if what they had done was sufficient to overcome what you might call the temporal inertia of the universe, if it was a sufficiently significant change, it split off an alternate past, an alternate universe, a separate universe. And they did some really, really awful things in the name of preserving history because it never happened afterwards. If they went back and murdered 1,000 people rescuing the Library of Alexandria, it didn't matter because they didn't actually change the past, and therefore none of the people they killed while they were there actually ever experienced being killed by them. However,
we open with the raid on the Great Library.
Yes,
That's
which
our
is bad.
opener.
It's bad, yeah. But then they find out that their theory of everything had not quite covered everything.
The theory of almost everything.
Yes, the theory of nearly everything. The theory of oops. But in this book, one of the primary driver of the action really is the guilt of one of the Antiquities Restoration Trust historians who was involved in the attack on the library at Alexandria, and her desperate need to do something to atone for all the carnage that ART has wreaked. What
price redemption?
Yes, indeed. And she teams up with Samuel Pepys, who, if you know your 17th century history, he's a really, really kind of cool guy. And she winds up also teaming up with Belisarius, which, it's kind of like, match me. Now, the problem is...
What a group.
Yes, it is a group. And it with those two on board, it should have ended well. Unfortunately, they were not the only ones on board, and it does not end well. And so Jacob is once again in the driver's seat blowing up universes. Okay. It's his thing. He likes to blow up universes.
Well, I have promised to you, David, that I for at least 2 books moving forward, I won't blow up any universes.
That's good. That's good.
I've sworn off this.
Well, in the first book, in Gordian Protocol, there's a second time-traveling civilization, which is it doesn't want Raybert to undo the knot, because it believes that it came into existence solely because of the knot. In fact, that's only partly true, as you find out as the story wraps up. However, they try really, really hard. They send Raybert to a virtual prison after destroying his body. One of my favorite scenes is the charge of the Vikings with Wagner's Valkyries, Ride of the Valkyries playing as they storm the gates. That's all I'm going to tell you about it, except it's a Jacob scene. It's great. You need to read the book for that, if nothing else. But in the in the Valkyrie Protocol, that universe still exists. Not that particular iteration of it, but the universe that it was that close to.
They don't have any of the experience of having met Raybert the first time, or the big dogfight that we of like 8 different time machines that we have at the end of the Gordian Protocol. They didn't experience any of that, though our protagonists did.
Yes.
But so they're almost the same people.
They're kind of exactly the same people they would have been up to the moment Raybert entered their lives. And this is a problem for Raybert, who was turned into fertilizer and winds up living in a synthetic body, a police body from the other time, from the admin timeline. And for, I don't know, the guy whose entire family was slaughtered by the admin guys trying to stop Raybert, who happens to be the grandfather of Benjamin Schroeder and winds up commanding the Gordian division at the end of it. There's this small amount of tension, it's made worse. It's made worse for the guys on admin side because they don't remember doing any of this because they didn't do it. But kind of thing. So there's a certain amount of Cold War mentality. Certainly at the beginning of this book.
Yeah, you have the kind of distrust between the two. Well, there's distrust on a personal level, but also on a societal level.
Yes.
That, for example, Sysgov is very much free with its use of AIs. And in fact, AIs are considered full-fledged citizens, and their president is an AI. Whereas you go to the admin, the antagonist from the first book, and the only good AI is an enslaved AI.
Well, one thing, both of these future societies include near misses, technological disasters that shaped how they evolved coming out the other side. And in one case, it was nanotech that got out of control and turned, for some reason, and it's really not because I don't like Chinese people. My daughters are Cambodian adopted, but for some reason, probably because it's where half the world's population lives, both of our disasters happen in Asia. And one of them, the Siskov, is really not as bad as the admin version. The admin version is sort of Skynet. And they basically have to nuke most of Asia to take Skynet out. So in the admin version of English has been primarily affected by Spanish more than any other language group in the way that the language has evolved. In Siskov, it's been affected more by Chinese than any other language group in the way that it's evolved. So they both speak what they fondly refer to as English, but it's not the same English. And that's one of the small problems they have when they meet. To me, one of the really interesting points to me about the Valkyrie protocol is watching the rapprochement of sorts between admin and Siskov, because we managed to come up with a threat they both had to unite against to keep their universe. Well, okay, Siskov's universe is going to go boom, which will be bad. But admin is going to find itself faced with a guy who has sort of a time-traveling Death Star and who does not like the admin if they don't sort of nip this in the bud, as it were. Would you say that was a fair summation of their motivator?
Yeah. There's, in terms of the kind of, the action conflict, the action set pieces between Gordy and Valkyrie. Valkyrie, we ramped things up quite a bit. In Gordian, there's, like I mentioned earlier, this dogfight between like 8 different time machines at the end. That's part of the main action set piece to close out the book. And in Valkyrie, we end up with like 3 fleets of up to 300 time machines and a time traveling battle station. And
well, it's also the first trans-universal war.
Yeah.
Because in Gordian Protocol, because of the nature of what spawned the subset of admin universe that they're in, that universe is kind of locked. They can't get in or out of it. So it's a battle in time, but in a single universe. In this one, there are, all told, we have 5 universes involved.
They all survive.
Two of them go to the showers early, kind of thing.
Hence why I've had to swear off.
Yeah. It's just like, Jacob operates on this series. There's always another one where that one came from, and I'm like, after a while, Jacob, no, there aren't. But it was fun. But we actually do look at some serious questions in this. Theodora Beckett, our time traveler who wants to make amends, who needs to make amends, is a far more sympathetic character by the time you get, especially by the time you get to the end of this book, than I think she was at all in the first book.
I think that Theodora forms, her journey kind of forms the emotional and moral core to the book.
It does. And the thing is that Raybert warned her about the fatal misjudgment that she makes in the course of this book. And we never specifically addressed this point in the book, but I've always felt while writing her and reading her that she doesn't listen to Raybert on this because she can't listen to Raybert on this, because if she does listen to Raybert on this, she won't act at all. Would you say that's fair, Jacob?
Oh, yeah.
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 And then ultimately she has to face Raybert and admit, you were right. But one of the questions that we address in this is, since nothing you achieve can last forever, okay, is there really a point in achieving it at all? The entire universe someday is going to close up shop. Okay. And so ultimately anything that you do is transitory, and is doing transitory stuff really that important, that worthwhile? And we obviously conclude that it is, because neither one of us
absolutely.
neither one of us likes dystopias, so that's just the way it is. But
don't worry, David. If we create a dystopian universe, I'll blow it up for you.
Oh, good, thank you. I knew I could rely on you.
I'll take care of it.
Replace it with something better. I got you. Let me talk a little bit about working with Jacob. I've worked with a lot of collaborators, and most of the collaborations that I've done have been fun. Very few of them have worked out as good a balance as this one.
I think our strengths complement each other very well. It's one of the reasons why these collaborations have turned out, I think, really well.
Yeah.
Just like from a technical side, my engineering background brings a certain perspective on like crafting future technology, for example. Whereas when I was working on certain scenes in the Valkyrie protocol, and I would put in write Samuel Pepys into a scene, I would then put in a note is like, David, your junior partner is faking it with this guy as hard as he can, but I am faking it, and please fix what I am doing. Because I don't do historical very well.
Yeah. Well, I think every writer's voice lends itself better to doing certain types of fiction. That I firmly believe that any good writer should be able to write just about any genre, because the core of the storytelling is always the characters in the story, and setting them problems to solve. The toolbox changes, and you need to be consistent in the tools that you give your characters, and that's where the writer's voice, the writer's background, the writer's knowledge base comes into play, because the degree to which you can give them a detailed tool set depends on the degree to which you have a detailed familiarity with the problems you're setting them. So, for example, if it's a military story and I need to be dealing with military mindset and that kind of thing, I'm golden. Okay. If it's historical, that's one of my strength sets. Okay. When you start getting into the applied hard sciences, I suddenly revert from being somebody with a fairly detailed amount of knowledge to being a layman who has a general understanding of processes rather than any kind of detailed understanding of processes.
Whereas with something like that, I'm like right smack in my comfort zone.
Oh, absolutely. And the fact that I do history well and that I do military stuff well does not mean that Jacob does them poorly. Okay, I would say that he has more of a strength set in the military than in the historical aspect of that particular duology. But that's why you do collaborations. That's one of the reasons you do collaborations, is so that your partner can fill in the voids in your own expertise. And that way you don't have some reader who has expertise in that area going, say what, when you reach that part of the story. And that always, if you know that a supposed expert in the story has something wrong, it always throws you out of your ability to continue to follow the story, to suspend disbelief. Dean Kuhn, yeah, go ahead.
One of the things about collaborating that was very interesting for me was, I mean, this wasn't the first collaboration that I've worked on, but it was the first one where I was the junior partner in terms of experience, and how we divided up the workload with Gordian and with Valkyrie. The one part that I like to talk about is the creation of our two 30th century societies, Syscov and the Admin, where David, you had kind of provided me with a sort of rough sketch, kind of like the picture frame for these two societies, and then you're like, go forth, Jacob, fill in this picture frame. And so I went and I created a kind of design document for these two societies. And I remember thinking to myself, that I know what Dave is going to say when I send this to him. He's going to say, Jacob, there are parts of this that I like, but you need to tone down the crazy. But I'm like, I'm just going to be brave and I'm just going to send it to him as is. And wouldn't you know it, he loved it all.
Well, one of the reasons that I especially wanted to get Jacob on board in this series, one of the reasons that I approached him, I mean, the fact that I really, really liked him and that I thought we would work well together was certainly more important than this. But in looking at the future history that he had created, the future societies he had created, I'm thinking here especially of Dragons of Jupiter. He had done it in a radically different way in many respects from the way that I had been creating future societies for 20, 30 years. And I wanted it to be different. I wanted to be pulled out of my own comfort zone as a writer. And I didn't want there to be so many resonances with the other future societies that I had created that people would go like, oh yeah, he's recycling Universe X again. And Jacob did me proud. He covered all the bases that I needed covered. He integrated some elements that pushed us in directions that wouldn't have occurred to me if the template hadn't been shaped the way that it was. And it was perhaps the biggest single incident of the serendipity of the synthesis effect of our different backgrounds coming together, I think, because it set the stage for so many other points at which the differences in our background and our expertise came into play, which was good. Now, somebody had asked a question, Kevin, I think, about how we settle differences of opinion. Do we arm wrestle? Do we have duels? Whatever. We have no differences of opinion. Basically, shut up, Jacob. Okay, see, that's how we deal with it. Shut up, Junior Partner.
Yes, that is how we deal with it.
It is not how we deal with it. I would say that one of the things that has been particularly pleasurable for me in doing this collaboration is that we have had some differences of I think not so much of opinion as to where the story should go, but we've had some differences of opinion as to how the technology should work or how something like this should happen. Mm-hmm. But what happens is that when we have those differences of opinion, we sit down to discuss them. And it's that classic synthesis, thesis, antithesis, and thesis emerges from it more often than not. What we wind up with is one or the other of us will have what I call an ooh shiny moment. And
these are dangerous moments.
Yes, they're very dangerous moments. We had one ooh shiny moment that went on in this very office for about 3 hours one night and completely changed where we'd been going with with the Valkyrie protocol. I mean, totally, completely changed it. And it happened.
That was an interesting day.
And it happened because it wasn't so much a difference of opinion as the fact that we'd found a mutual plot hole that we had to deal with. Mm-hmm. And in discussing ways to deal with it, we suddenly said, wait, what if we did this? What if we did that? What if we did the other?
Ooh, shiny.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that is one of the joys of a good collaboration.
Well, for me and how I approach, points where, like you'll want to turn right and I'll kill the goldfish. I didn't know that I wasn't supposed to kill the goldfish. We're not talking about a goldfish, we're talking about a character. But I refer to the character as a goldfish as code. But
that was because he was commenting it online before the book came out, and he was like, "Yes, I killed. Let's call it a goldfish."
And little did I know that David had plans for the goldfish in the series moving forward. But no, how I approach, like where, say, David wants to turn right and I want to turn left, is that, understanding, looking at, okay, well, why does David want to turn right? What advantages does he see there versus what advantages do I see in turning left? And, then I sort of ask myself, well, how big a deal is turning left to me? And is this, is this something that, I feel really strongly about, or is this, a point where I'm like, right's fine. And it's like, we can turn right. It might be more interesting that, I wanted to go left, but right could be cool too.
Well, I think
go ahead.
Part of it is if you're going to do a collaboration, then you have, I think, a professional and a moral responsibility for it to be a collaboration. And that means that you have to be respectful and thoughtful of what your partner is bringing to the mix.
Yes.
If I feel really, really, really strongly about something, then I will hold out in favor of doing it that way. But the whole time that I'm doing that, I'll be looking at ways that I can accommodate Jacob's concerns with what I want to do. And if I can't find a way that will do it, that will also accommodate his concerns with it, then we find a different way to do it.
Now, there is one interesting point that I want to raise, and I don't think I've ever mentioned this to you, David, is that there are certain, like, we'll pass into the manuscript back and forth, and you putting comments in the margins, and there are certain phrases that David will use when commenting if he feels really strongly about the point. And he's being very polite about it. But when I see one of those, it's like, okay, all right, this is something that David feels really strongly about. And if I want to go, like I said, go left here, it might be take some convincing. Is it going to be worth it?
Well, and
David, go ahead, David.
Generally speaking, if Jacob thinks that it is going to be worth it, he'll make his case very strongly. And
I am not known for being shy.
Well, no, I would not call you that. But there comes a time at which, in some instances, somebody has to make the call on a difference of opinion, and usually that's the senior partner in the work. I do collaborations, for example, with Eric Flint as well. Okay, when Eric is writing in the Honorverse with me, I'm the senior partner. When I'm writing in his universe, the 1632 universe, he's the senior partner, because there has to be a unified voice at the end of the day that's a fusion of the two voices.
Yeah, and that aspect of the relationship, when we look at a point that we have disagreement, is very much in my mind. That I am the junior partner, and there is a certain amount of respectfulness.
But by the same token, there's a responsibility on the part of the senior partner to, for want of a better term, to be collegial about it. Jacob is not going to raise a concern just because he feels like having a prima donna moment. It's therefore incumbent upon me not to take a position and refuse to back off from it just because it's my position. Okay. In a very real sense, your collaborator is also your editor, because you're kind of making suggestions in the editorial process to each other as the book goes along. And if you're smart, you're looking at the places where what your collaborator suggested is going to push you into considering something you hadn't considered before. Now, we have a question here that wants to know, this is from Timothy, are there certain critical tools that helped you both in the writing of the Valkyrie Protocol? I think we've actually just addressed a good bit of that.
I'd just like to add that with a story this complicated, with time travel and just all the different aspects, outline.
Oh yeah,
a lot of prep work goes into these novels before either of us puts the first word down in scene one.
Yeah, I'd also like to say that once upon a time, if you were going to do a collaboration, you had to live in the same town, and it was better if you lived in the same house, simply because everything was on paper. And if you were going to have a story conference, you needed to be face-to-face to have a story conference. Now, Jacob and I, if we have to, we can jump on Skype or Zoom and have a conference like this. Plus, we can just throw the manuscript back and forth, and we can comment on it, we can edit on it, the whole 9 yards. So collaboration in an internet world is a whole different animal from what collaboration was, for example, when Steve White and I were doing Insurrection and the early Starfire novels. And that certainly helps. I think that the biggest critical tool, though, is probably trusting your collaborator. And when I say trusting, I mean not just trusting his quality as a writer, but trusting that if he says he has a problem, then there's a problem. And you need to figure out what that is, because if you did something that your collaborator didn't understand, then you can be darn sure that a bunch of your readers aren't going to understand what you did either. And so you need to do that that due diligence and accept that your partner, your writing partner, wouldn't be raising the point if it wasn't a legitimate point. You also have to be willing to trust your partner to come up with solutions to problems. It has to be, you can't do it on a not made by David solution. You have to be willing to say, okay, wow, look what Jacob did here. This is really cool. This works, even if it's not where you were planning on going in the first place.
I
For
remember
example, the goldfish.
Okay, that wasn't the example I was thinking of. I was actually, oh, that poor goldfish.
Yes. All right, go ahead.
I was actually thinking of the design of the time machines.
Yeah.
And one aspect that you were concerned about was the physical footprint of the trans-temporal vehicle, the TTV.
The heavy cruiser-sized.
Yeah. It's like a size of a, wet Navy cruiser or destroyer, just hanging over the city.
Yeah.
It's like, what do you do with that? Where do you hide that? And your thought was to, have it be bigger on the inside. And I'm like, David, we can't do this.
So we can't. We just paint it blue, and it can just,
we can't have a doctor of history and his companions traveling around in a time machine that's bigger on the inside. So it's like, hold on, David, let me come up with a tech solution to this, please.
Well, remember that my original concept for this was like 30 years old. I was not really thinking TARDIS, but I had to agree when Jacob pointed this out. I said, oh, yeah, well, I hadn't really thought about that. Okay, we have another question. It's, what sort of research did you have to undertake for this book, and what was your favorite thing you learned? Jacob probably had to do more historical research than I did, but that's because I'm a historian. Having said that, some of the research that I did, I think probably my favorite thing that I learned was Patriarch Ephraim, the Patriarch of Antioch, when our interaction with the Byzantine Empire begins. He's just such a really cool guy historically. I think I may have made him even a little cooler in the book because I liked him so much.
I think you're allowed a little bit of liberty.
Yeah, but that was probably my favorite fact. The most research that I had to do was definitely in building the 6th century component of the book. I knew Belisarius's history pretty well. I knew, and he's obviously going to be a major character here. I knew Narcissus. I knew Justinian and his Theodora. I didn't know the city of Byzantium anywhere near as well as I thought I did. And researching, the city streets and the structures and whatnot of Constantinople was cool. Jacob?
Yeah, I remember I did a lot of historical history because, you know, that's a weak point for me. But there were, you know, scenes that, you know, were part of my responsibility that took place in a historical setting. And even though David was going to, you know, rework them, I wanted to provide a solid foundation for him to do that work upon. I considered that a very important part of my responsibility as the junior partner, even though, you know, that was very much in his wheelhouse rather than mine. As far as research that I did, the effects of nuclear detonations in a vacuum, which come up a few times in our book.
Yeah. The boom today, boom tomorrow.
Because it's you know, it's interesting because, you know, fundamentally it's the same energy being released, but how it manifests without, you know, an atmosphere, you know, to kind of send this physical shockwave through.
Yeah.
You know, it's
well, and also the difference in EMP, you know, when you're just exploding in a vacuum. I think that my favorite bit of research that Jacob did probably was Samuel Pepys, because he really created Pepys' personality. We had discussed what we needed him to be and to do. But I went back and substantially reworked the historical scenes because that was my responsibility area. But I liked what he had done so much with Pepys that I tried to be really, really careful to maintain that same feel that he had created in the original character. And I think he's one of the gems that we discovered in writing the book.
I didn't know a whole lot about Samuel Pepys.
Fascinating guy, by the way.
Oh, yes, he is. Oh, he's a fascinating guy. And gets to do some interesting stuff in our book.
Yeah. Now, in the next book, which Jacob has completed the draft on, I have not yet gone in and done my part on it. It's a substantial change of gears. And for this one, Jacob was introduced to Ed McBain, who's
I love the 87th Precinct book.
Yeah, see,
so
that's going to be his research discovery for the next book. Oh, and there he is.
I'm back.
Yes.
So do you guys have the name for the next book?
Do
we get to know?
Not yet, really, but
That's
it will not have protocol in it.
Okay.
We are going to be saving protocol for universe altering, i.e. Jacob almost got to blow up another one, events in the timeline.
Yes. So the general way that the series that we're envisioning the series moving forward is that you'll have like the protocol path, and those are like David said, the big existential threats. But then you'll have a kind of tighter, more intimate story path, which the title is a work in progress, even though the first draft is pretty much done.
Well, the way I think of it is that the ones that aren't going to be the protocol books are going to be kind of the nuts and bolts books, the ones where we actually see the societies interacting with one another, whereas the protocol books are going to be the one where we see the societies having to unite against a threat of some sort. I would also like to say that I said earlier that these will be linear, but without a central story arc. What I meant by that is that each given novel will build upon the platform of all the ones that have come before it, but we don't have a specific direction and an ultimate conclusion to the series in mind. We see threads about the ways these societies are going to interact and so forth. But unlike my Honor Harrington books or my Safehold books, this is not one where you're going to... It shouldn't be one where you're left waiting for unresolved plot strands to be resolved at the end of a book.
And I also think that this also provides readers potentially with more entry points into the series. As we were careful to make sure that, yes, if you read Gordian, you're going to get more out of Valkyrie, but a reader could jump into Valkyrie and still enjoy the book.
Yeah. What will happen will be that you may discover when you get to the next book that there were unresolved plot strands that you didn't know were unresolved in the earlier book, like Theodora Beckett and her ongoing grappling with her responsibility for actions that we saw in the first book. Okay, as far as the reader at the end of Gordian Protocol was concerned, that was not an issue that was even on their radar. Okay, but that was the ongoing story strand that we built on in building the second book. And we will introduce completely new elements to push stories as well. But all of them will still be connected to the ones that preceded them. I haven't done a series like that in forever. I mean, if ever, because I have always had an end point in mind when I began the series. In this case, I don't have a specific end point in mind. The end point is to watch these two or more societies interacting as they go forward. And that makes it particularly fun for me.
These particularly the third one. I know we're kind of getting ahead of ourselves, but man, kind of diving into the nuts and bolts of Cisco Society, I had a blast doing it.
Yes. See, now this may be one of those points where I have to say, "Whoa, Jacob," but we will see. I certainly don't anticipate any problems. He does have. He's the only person that I work with who has shiny moments as bad as mine. They're just quieter and they go in different directions. Okay, it's really been interesting. In a lot of ways, Jacob is me 25 years ago with tech instead of history.
Wow.
Okay. Trimble world. That's all I got to say.
It sounds like you guys are a really good complement for each other. And it's nice to have a story that you can kind of come into it where you may, because especially as these things grow bigger, it can be really intimidating trying to commit to a 17-book series.
When you're doing a series which is progressing from beginning point to end point, after you're more than about 4 books into it, you just have to trust your reader to go back and pick up the earlier books, because you can't provide them with all of the backstory that they need to make the current events make sense. You can't do it even in a David Weber length book, and so that's one reason why I write series in chronological order, because if somebody does need to jump in, then they can go, they know, okay, I start with book 1 and I catch up, rather than, oh God, where's the origin, arc going to be? And it can work perfectly fine doing it the other way. The Aden series is a case in point for that. Oh, and somebody asked earlier, I think one of the questions was about favorite time travel stories. One of my favorites is actually Dean Kuntz's Lightning. If you haven't read it, Kuntz has managed to avoid being genre classified, and Lightning is a time travel story, which deals with the concept of temporal inertia and how hard it is to actually change history, and it's very good. It is one of those where you hit a minor technical glitch that throws you out of your suspension of disbelief, because much as I love Dean Koontz writing, one of his research assistants misplaced a decimal point at some point, and he is firmly convinced that every Uzi has a 300-round magazine. Now, a 300-round magazine would be long enough that you could put little wheels on the bottom of it and fire from a brace, if you know what I'm saying. And so every time I hit one of his 300-round Uzis, I go, okay, fine. That's just, yeah. But that, and I love Kuntz's writing. Okay. Some of it more than others. But that man can write. I think maybe my favorite is, what is it? Is it TikTok?
I just remembered a time travel book that I enjoyed, Guns of the South.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, Harry Turtle.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
Yeah. With guys in South Africa shipping weapons to Robert E. Lee during the Civil War.
So AK-47s.
So that the South wins the Civil War. But it doesn't get them the end that they wanted, because slavery is being abolished anyway and everything else. It's a very interesting look at some of the historic personages involved. One of the things that you find out if you're interested in history and do historical research is that any historical character you look at is going to be a lot more complex than we like them to be, especially in our kind of hyper-partisan age. You know, we want them to be either black. We want everybody to be black and white. Okay. And we want to condemn or preserve on kind of the basis of an absolute judgment of history, absolutist judge of history. And if you look at somebody, like William Tecumseh Sherman, okay, Sherman is reviled for his attitude towards Native Americans. And he had many friends in the South, and he understood why the South wanted to secede. But he was also the guy who said, no. Union has to be preserved one way or the other. He's the guy who burned a swath across the South. And I'm a Southerner, okay? Born in Cleveland. So he was also from Ohio, but two Yankees both came south, different impact on their neighbors. But the more research that you do on Sherman, the more you begin to appreciate who he really was, and that some of the statements that he made that have been taken out of context or the historical context has changed so much from his time. Okay, the same man would not say the same thing today. You follow what I'm saying? We have the advantage of looking back from a 100-year perspective, 150-year perspective on what he was saying and doing. And our 150-year perspective was created out of what he said and did. And that's why applying a 20th century litmus test to anybody, for good or ill, is never really, the way to go. That's one reason I'm interested in time travel novels and in alternate history. But it's just one of the reasons I love history is because nobody could write a novel like that. Do you know what I'm saying? Yeah, it's just the stuff that goes on, the stuff that you find.
It's not getting any easier.
No, it's not. It's not.
So I've got a quick question for you guys, because we are hitting the limits of our time.
Yes.
What comes next besides book 3 of the series? Do you guys have anything else that you're working on?
We have 2 more under contract after this, Jacob. Is that right? In this series.
Yeah, I mean 5 total.
Yeah.
Right now, 2 have been, delivered. We're working on the 3rd one, then 2 more after that. Yes.
Yeah. And are those 2 the protocol line, or are you gonna 2 of those will be the non-protocol line?
They're all going to be in the same universe. That's why Jacob is calling them the Gordian Division now, because Gordian Division is the division that deals with time travel or trans-temporal in Cispal's police organization, military organization. And so I think he's probably right to move it to Gordian Division. I keep saying Gordian Protocol because that's how we were originally referencing them. But a lot of the same characters will bleed over. Okay, so they're not really going to be a separate series. The books are going to have a different emphasis as we go along. Is that a fair way to put it, Jacob?
Yeah, I think so.
Now, I've got a gazillion things going on outside this, and I am. I gave myself a concussion some years ago in Atlanta. I face planted into a cement floor and broke my nose. It was bad. And I am still dealing with some consequences of that that affect me, particularly in terms of my ability to focus for a long stretch of time and be creative while doing it. And I used to write my usual writing style was to work in 10-hour blocks or so, and I can't do that now. So it's having a significant effect on how I produce stuff and my ability to meet schedule commitments and so forth. I think that what I'm producing is as good as anything I ever produced. It's just not something that I can do in the same fashion that I did it in before. The main reason that I'm doing so many collaborations, though, these days, isn't because of that, because most of the collaborations I'm doing I was already going to do before that happened. It is literally because I think that there is a certain degree of responsibility to pay forward, if you will. This field, this craft has been very good to me. And when I see somebody like Jacob, who I think has the potential to be a heavy hitter contributor down the road, then I think that if I can help shorten some of the learning loop involved, then good. Okay.
Part of it for me is, while working on these collaborations and like, oh, wow, I've been doing that wrong since I started writing. Why didn't no one tell me?
Well, and it really sometimes, one of the great people have been asking me for years how e-publishing and so forth have changed the genre. And they've changed it enormously. I think when War of Honor went to like number 4 on the is it War of Honor? I think went to like number 4 on the New York Times list. Bain printed like 80,000 copies in hardcover. Uncompromising Honor hit the list a lot sooner, and they only published like 20,000. And the difference was the ebook sales. So that's one way that it's affected traditional publishing houses. But what I like to say for other people is, okay, what self-publishing and ebooks allow is you see a whole lot of stuff you'd never have seen before. That's the great thing about it. The terrible thing about it is that you see a whole lot of stuff you never would have seen before. Because a lot of the material that gets out simply is not, the same quality, because it doesn't have, and I'm not talking about the Darwinian nature of struggling to prove that you're the best, but there are lessons that you have to learn if you have to convince somebody else to invest money in publishing your work. Okay. And one of the drawbacks of self-publishing is that if you're doing something wrong and you don't have an outside editor, it's like my wife used to coach synchro swimming, and she said, practice makes perfect only if you practice perfectly. Okay. And that's also true of writing. Writing is very much like a physical skill. You learn by doing, and you fall down a lot. And the falling down is when you hit something that doesn't work in telling the story. Well, sometimes it works for you, but not for anybody else. And unless somebody else tells you that the emperor has no clothes on, you go right on doing it that way, on the assumption that since it worked for you and nobody else seemed to have a problem with it, it works. Okay. Things as simple as grammar, punctuation. Where do you use a period? Where do you use a dash? Where do you use a comma? I have seen a lot of self-published works where something as simple as that isn't done. And it's not, I don't mention it because I'm a grammar Nazi, but I mention it because whether people realize it or not, the way that you punctuate a sentence controls the pace at which the reader reads the sentence, whether they realize it or not. If they hit a comma or a period or a dash, there is a connection between the punctuation on the page and the pacing of that sentence for that reader. And these are all little tools that you learn simply by doing them. And if I can, for example, the character that Jacob killed in the Gordian Protocol, I had intended for her to live, but I was looking at what he had done, and I realized that it could become a much more powerful, impactful scene the way that he had done it. And so I got behind it and I pushed and I tweaked it, and he turned around to me later and he said, man, I didn't realize you expected her to live, but you just took it and kind of, turned up the volume, and everything.
Cranked it up to 11, David. That's what you did.
but and part of that was simply the fact that I have been doing this for a lot longer than he has. And in the process, one of the things that you have to learn is how to communicate directly with your readers' emotions, as well as their intellectual appreciation for where the story is going. And no author will do that for all of his audience, for all of his potential audience, because every reader is different. Every book is a collaboration between the author and the reader, because the author can structure it, can give you the dialogue, but the reader is the one who fills in the background, who handles the tone in which that reader hears that dialogue. And so there are going to be writers whose writing voice really, really works for you. And there are going to be writers who are very successful with other audiences, and his or her writing voice simply does not work for you at all. I've worked with people whose writing voice is significantly different from mine. I've learned from them, and I think they have learned from me. But in the end, the way that you write is a very individual and personal thing. I will say that one of the things that I am looking at right this minute is I have a whole bunch of series going on, and I turn 69 this month. Okay. I do not regard my literary legacy as a sacred trust. Okay. I regard it as my craft. And I have a wife and I have 3 kids, and I am perfectly fine with somebody else continuing the storylines, for example, to help get the kids through college and whatnot if something happened to me. But having said that, the only really successful continuations of a long-running series that I have ever seen have been done by people who were involved in that series before they had to become the sole author in them. And if I can find writers whose integrity and whose skills I trust, like Jacob, then there is a potential brain trust that would be available to Tony Weisskopf at Bain or to Sharon if they were looking to continue and complete. Joelle Presby. There are several people that I've worked with that I would be perfectly comfortable with the notion that they would continue the story. We can't all be Kevin Anderson and come in cold and take a series of that stature and carry it through. But I'm a little bit in that position myself with Jerry Pournelle, with the Tran books, with Phil and I finishing his draft for Mamelukes, and we're going to be doing additional novels set in that same universe. And it's not like I don't anticipate leaving tomorrow. Okay, I'd like to be Jack Williamson. I don't think anybody will ever be Jack Williamson again, but if I can help folks advance in terms of their visibility, of their ability to do this as their primary craft, and if in the process I can find people who would be available that I could trust my beloved characters to, if something happened to me, it's a win-win situation. There's a line in one of the original, in I think the very first Tran novel, Janissaries, where Rick, who is he's the college kid, the ROTC guy who winds up in charge on this alien planet, and the nasty French Foreign Legion guy who mutinied against him winds up all blowed up at the end of it, kind of thing. It's sad. But one of the characters says, I hadn't really thought about ethics as a survival tool. But it is, okay? Because if you're an ethical man, if you're a moral man, whatever, then people are more willing to trust you when it all hits the fan. And I think that there is an element of that in any craft, that, part of your ethics, if you're going to be in that craft, if you're going to have succeeded in that craft, if it's going to have done well by you, is for you to be willing and prepared to do well by other people within that craft. And I don't think of myself as an artist. Okay, I think of myself as a craftsman, a storyteller, not an author, and that's how I approach the degree to which I want to be there. I was fortunate enough to know Roger Zelazny, and Roger and I did a short story for him for the Williamson Effect and a couple of things. We never wrote together. But I learned a lot about the responsibilities of the profession from watching him. There were a lot worse role models that you could have had. And I am incredibly grateful that I was able to have that experience. And if I can push some of that same experience for other writers, then I will feel like I've sort of paid Roger back a little bit. for the support, the belief that yes, you can do this. Okay, I remember that Path of the Fury had just come out. I was at a con with Roger. It's like my third, fourth book. And Roger and I were sitting at the same table because Z and W came close together signing. And I had signed every copy of my book in Virginia, and he was in a hiatus between people coming by to get his book signed. And he turned around and he said, I finished Path of the Fury last night. And I'm like, oh my God, Roger's the last he read my book. Oh my God. And I said, yes. And he said, I think it may have been the best blend of fantasy and science fiction I've ever read. And I was like, whoa, okay, I can do this. Yeah. But on the one hand, when you've reached a certain level, you have an obligation to tell people what you did here doesn't work. But by the same token, you have an equally great or greater one to say, and what you did over here really does work. Do you see what I'm saying? And I hate it, but I am now at that point. I mean, like I say, I'll be 69 this year. And I sold the first book in 89. So, I mean, seriously, this year, it's been 30 years since I sold the first book.
It sounds like you have a great partner in Jacob.
I think so.
To carry on this series.
Yes.
Jacob, are you working on anything outside of this series?
Well, I have two solo novels that I've submitted to Baen. There isn't a contract for them. They're just works that I have submitted. But my primary focus right now is the Gordian series.
Jacob, are you looking at more in the Dragons of Jupiter?
Eventually, in my copious amounts of free time.
I know that works. Yeah.
It's. I mean, because I'm not a full-time author. The time that I spend on writing is more limited than someone in David's position who does it as a career. Yeah. And so I have to approach it from, well, what's the best bang for the buck in terms of the time and energy that I'm putting forth. And by and large, I mean, by a significant margin, the best way to spend it is by collaborating with David because, for me and my growth as an author, I learned so much in the process.
I think also one thing that a collaboration with an established author does is that it opens a door to other readers for you. Because, people are like, oh, this is a so-and-so novel. Who's this other guy? Well, let's read it and find out.
I'm fine being the other guy to David Weber.
But it's okay. Literary sharecropping has always just really, really been, no, not on my list. But when you've got somebody who is the caliber that Jacob is, and the caliber that I think Jacob will become, then what you're doing is you are telling the reading public, hey, look over here what I found when you do a collaboration with him. Okay. And if and when the time comes that he can go full-time professional writer, I predict that he's going to do very, very well. Right this minute, BMW is looms large in his life.
Well, one way to help that is to order down below the signed and personalized books, because obviously buying the books is the best way to make sure that authors are supported and can continue their craft.
Help Jacob go full time. I personally have no mercenary motive whatever in your buying this book. Just do it for Jacob.
And get a great book out of it as well.
I hope so.
We're very happy with how Valkyrie turned out.
Yes, we are.
It's a great story.
Well, it has been great hearing you guys talk, and we're looking forward in the future to maybe having you both out to the store in San Diego.
When the day comes that once again, the silver bird flies. Yes, I understand.
It will be a magical day to have.
Oh yes.
Author show.
I realized that kids who are just starting to grow up today will never see a Western movie and understand what it means when they pull their bandanas up before they go into the bank. Almost thinking,
that's a very normal thing to do.
Yeah, absolutely. Doesn't everybody do that?
Obviously, there was a virus.
I've been telling people that what I miss the most is normal. Just to have normal back.
Yes, that's
nice. What I miss.
That would be nice.
Well, getting a signed book is as close to normal as you can get. It's tough to do right now. So we'll say goodbye, and thank you so much to David and Jacob for the great talk, and for everyone who watched on Facebook and watched on Crowdcast. We really appreciate it. Otherwise, you guys have a great evening and a good week, and we'll talk to you hopefully in the future for book 3.
All right.
Thank you for having us.
Okay.
You're welcome. Bye.
Bye-bye.